Welcome back, designers! In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a parody of Starbucks Coffee's logo. We're going to be advertising a fictional business in our own logo design, but in so doing, we're also going to be copying the overall circular layout used by Starbucks famously in their mermaid logo. In so doing, I'm going to show you how you can install different thematic fonts to your computer, how you can use the character panel on Photoshop to adjust typographic settings, and how you can wrap text around an ellipse in order to create this circular design. I'll also show you how you can match colors online using Photoshop's color picker panel. So, without further ado, let's get started. To get started on this project, I will be creating a new document on Photoshop. I'm going to hit Command N or Control N on a PC. I'm going to select the Print preset, and I'm going to call this document Logo Parody. I'm going to enter a width of 10 inches by a height of 10 inches. If it says pixels, you're in the wrong preset. I'm going to leave the resolution and the RGB color mode as is, but I'm going to be changing the background contents from white to transparent. Then I'm going to click Create. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see my document a little bit closer. You guys will recall that the transparent background in Photoshop is designated by this checkerboard pattern. Don't freak out because the checkerboard pattern will not export into your final draft, will not print in your final draft. This is just Photoshop's way of telling you that there's no color, there's no gradients, there's basically no pixels there. Before I start designing, I want to make sure that I have a very symmetrical design. So I'm going to go to the View menu at the top of my workspace. I'm going to select Guides, and I'm going to select New Guide, and input a vertical guide of 5 inches or 5 IN. I'm going to do the same, going back to View, Guides, and New Guide. And this time I'm going to be inputting a horizontal guide of 5 IN, or 5 inches. It's a little bit hard to see, but don't worry because, again, this is just for the purposes of placing our ellipses. I'm going to be using my Shape tool, and if you guys right-click on your Shape tool, you'll be able to see several other shapes that are nested here. I'm going to be selecting the second Shape tool, which is Ellipse. Ellipse is just a fancy way of saying circle. And in order to make my ellipses very symmetrical, I'm going to hold down Shift and drag. While I hold down Shift, I'm going to drag in order to make a very big ellipse. For the moment, the color of the ellipse doesn't really matter. You do want it to be a noticeable color just so that you can see what you're doing. And I'm going to be placing the ellipse roughly towards the center of my canvas. After this, I will be making a copy of this ellipse by pressing Command J or Control J on a PC. You can see that a copy has been made right over here in the Layers panel, but you cannot see it until I drag it over. To make my life easier, I'm going to go back to the Shape tool and make this copy a different color just so that I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to drag to make the ellipse a little bit smaller. For the moment, I don't want this ellipse to have a fill. I just want it to have a stroke. So I'm going to select a fill of none, and I'm going to click on stroke and give it a stroke of white. And I'm going to increase the pixel size of that stroke so that the stroke is visible. I'm going to set it to roughly about 40 pixels. I can always go back and change it later. I'm going to make another ellipse. So I'm going to hit Command J to duplicate this one and make it smaller and fit it towards the middle of the document, like so. This one is going to have a fill of black or another dark color. What I want to start doing is playing around with different color schemes that might better suit the project that I have in mind. So the color scheme is going to depend very much on the theme of the business that you're advertising. It's going to depend on the kind of vibe that you want consumers to get. I'm going to be using colorhunt.com so that I can look for an interesting color scheme to match the idea that I have in mind. Any of these color schemes are going to be great for you to be able to match on Photoshop. So if I wanted something to look very much like the Starbucks logo, I might want to select this color scheme with all the different kind of greens. When I click on the color scheme to expand it, you guys will see that it gives me the hex codes for each color, so I can easily copy it into Photoshop's color picker panel. For the moment, I have in mind a color scheme using a lot of oranges and blues, just like our school colors. So I'm going to browse through the different selections on colorhunt.com until I have one that is interesting to me. I think I'll be using this color palette today. So what I want to do is I want to leave this open somewhere on my computer so that I can reference these colors again. I might want to start off by maybe using some of these oranges or some of these blues. I think what I'll do is I'll copy this orange, and then when I'm working within Photoshop, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go and copy the orange to this ellipse. So changing this bright pink, going into the fill in the options bar with the ellipse tool selected, clicking right over here to open the color picker panel, and then pasting the hex code for that orange. And it's just like that. I'll also be using those same colors when I start working on the typography. Let's start adding some typography, shall we? I decided this business is going to be called Trojan Treats Cafe. Very school spirit. Now what I want is for the text to actually go and wrap around this inner ellipse. So I'm going to select this ellipse, the smaller one. In fact, I'm going to call this one small circle, just so I don't get confused. With my small circle layer selected, I'm going to use my type tool, and I'm going to drag the type tool to the edges. And you guys will see that when I drag to the edges of the ellipse, the cursor turns from this like square to a squiggly line. When you guys see the squiggly line, you're going to click, and it's going to start adding some text all around the ellipse. I'm going to start typing in the name of the business, Trojan Treats Cafe. I want to go and edit this text using my character panel. So in the options bar, you guys will see several of the typographic settings already laid out for you. The character panel is going to be hiding over right here in this little clipboard icon, or right here in this little icon that says character, and it has like a little A on it. If you don't see either of those, you can go to Window and Character to open it right back up. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually increase the size of my text, make it noticeable. I'm going to set it to about 48 points. And I'm going to change it to an attention-grabbing color so I can see the actual text against this orange background. Then I'm pressing the space bar on my computer so that I can move the text over above this guide right over here. You can see I made the text a little bit too big, so I'm going to reduce its size to about 30 points and see how that looks. For the moment, I'm not too concerned about it looking perfect because I'm going to be editing the font momentarily, but I want to be able to place everything exactly where I want it to go. With that being said, I'm now going to go and click on the middle circle. I'm going to select this ellipse. I'm going to call this layer middle circle, again, just to make it easier for me to recognize what I'm working with. And then using the type tool again, I'm just going to go and drag on the corner of the ellipse. So you guys will see that when I click on the corners of the ellipse, it's going to turn into a squiggly line, which is going to let me wrap text around the ellipse. I want to create an interesting subheading. So I decided, since we are either living or, in my case, working in a very bilingual city, my subtitle is going to be El Sabor de Hialeah. You may start laughing now. As you can see, the text is upside down, which looks very silly. So what I'm going to be doing is right underneath the type tool, I have a tool called the path selection tool, and it looks like a black arrow. So if you guys right click on the tool right underneath your type tool, select path selection, And what you guys are going to do is drag the cursor over the text that you had added, and you guys are going to see these arrows that are pointing in two different directions. I'm going to go and flip it in, just like so. So before I start editing the space, and before I start editing the size, I do want to select a more attention-grabbing font than the one I'm currently using called Futura. There's nothing wrong with Futura, it's just a little dull, at least for the purposes of this project. I want to look for a font that has more to do with the food industry, with coffee, with the flavors of Latin cooking. So I'm going to be looking on tofont.com for something a little bit more thematic. Tofont.com is a really cool website. It hosts a bunch of different fonts that you guys can install to your computers in order to do very thematic projects. If you guys will look at the bar right over here, you guys will see that several of the fonts are broken down by categories, by themes, by holidays, to make searching for a font easier. So if I was selecting something for Halloween, I would want to go look under the Halloween category, and several of these fonts are going to have Halloween vibes with the pumpkins, with the spooky looking text, dripping blood, and so forth. That's not the vibe I'm going for today. So I'm going to be typing in coffee into the search bar and looking to see what different options are available on this website. I previously used this font called Love Coffee because I really appreciated the way that the O was a coffee bean. I might be going for a different kind of vibe this time around. Maybe I might select something that looks a little bit more like script or more like handwriting. So for the moment, I'm going to type baby coffee. I'm going to select download, and this is going to go into the downloads folder of my computer automatically. So I'm going to click to open that. Having expanded the file, I can see that there's several different categories for this one font. I'm going to select this one right over here, baby coffee. I'm going to double click to open it. And then I'm going to click install. I'm using a Mac, so it may look a little bit different on your PC computers, but it's basically the exact same process. Now, in order for me to go and use that font, I'm going to be using my type tool. I'm going to click on the layer that says Trojan Treats Cafe, and I'm going to highlight the text. In my character panel, I can see the last font I used was Futura. I'm going to click the drop-down menu, and I'm going to look under the B section for baby coffee. Now, because I just changed the font, you guys are going to see that the text is going to look a little bit different. So before it looked bigger at 30 points, now it looks a lot smaller. So I'm going to go and increase the size. Now, if you're going to be using a font that looks like handwriting or that mimics script, you want to avoid using all caps. So it's okay if you're going to use all caps for something like a font like Futura, like you can see right now in El Sabor de Hialeah. I'm going to increase the size, and if I go and drag on the double T's right over here next to the point size, I'm able to go and eyeball it. So right now I have it set to right about 72 points. 72 points is basically 1 inch if you were to go and print this design and measure it with a ruler, which I'm thinking looks pretty good. But there's still a few little edits that I want to make here other than the font. So what I want to actually do is I want to play around with the baseline. This right here is the baseline, and it basically controls how close the text is going to be to this ellipse in the middle. And I don't want them to be touching. So if you look really closely, you'll see that the J is kind of touching the stroke of that ellipse, which I don't like. So I'm going to highlight it, and I'm just going to go and drag. And you guys will see as I drag my mouse over the shortcut, the text starts separating a little bit more from the ellipse. So if I drag to the left, it gets a lot closer and starts overlapping the ellipse, which is a problem. If I drag to the right, set it to about 18 points, you guys will see that that J is no longer touching the ellipse, which makes me happy. And I think that looks a little bit cleaner and less cluttered. I think what I'll do is I'll probably reuse that same font for my subtitle, which is El Sabor de Hialeah. So I'm going to go double click on that text file, And I'm going to select baby coffee yet again. You don't want to use too many fonts, especially in such a small, minimal design, so keep it to 2 fonts or fewer. Once again, it's on all caps, so I'm going to be changing that to use lowercase as well. I'm going to be increasing the size, so I'm going to be setting it to right about 65 points. And once again, I don't like the way that it's touching, so I'm going to be increasing the baseline and making it a little bit further away from that ellipse. I'm going to set it to about 22 points. You guys are going to adjust it depending on your own design needs. Now, when I went and adjusted the baseline, I can see that the words kind of look like they're crushing each other. So I'm going to go and adjust the tracking. The tracking is the space in between each letter in the word. So if I adjust it too much, you guys can see that it's now way too distant, which looks bad. I'm going to set it to roughly about 120 points, so it doesn't look like it's crammed. That looks pretty good to me. Now I do want to show typographic hierarchy, which would mean that the text at the top should be a little bit bigger or should be a little bit more attention grabbing somehow. So I'm going to select Trojan Treats Cafe once more, and I'm going to try to make it maybe a little bit larger to take up a little bit more space around the ellipse. Typographic hierarchy means that you're going to basically make whatever you want people to look at first a little bit bigger, a little bit flashier somehow. The idea is that people should look there first. So how do you make them look? Maybe you just need to make it a little bit bigger. Maybe you just need to make it a more attention-grabbing color. I'm also shortly going to be playing around with some effects and things like that. But that looks pretty good. I'm actually going to get rid of these guides by going to View, Guides, and Clear Guides so that they're not distracting me. And before I keep playing around with the different typographic settings and start adding some effects, I think I'm ready to go and add some kind of image to illustrate my logo design. In order to illustrate this design, I'm going to be using an image from pexels.com. I'm going to hit Command O or Control O on a PC to look for that image in my Downloads panel. I want to make sure before I move the image over that I have the small circle layer selected. So I'm going to go to Window, Arrange, and Tile Vertically so that I can see both documents side by side. Using my Move tool, which is tool number 1, I'm going to be dragging my image of the flan over. And you guys can see that the image is right above that small circle layer, which is going to be really important when I right-click on it and select Create Clipping Mask in order to fit it perfectly inside the circle. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I'm totally loving the way that spoon is digging into the yummy looking flan. I'm just going to resize the image slightly using Control T and dragging on the corners of the image, just make it a little bit smaller so you can see a little bit more of that flan in its entirety. Alright designers, as you can see, I'm almost at the finish line. What I actually want to do is finish my design with a few effects to give it a little bit of fun and visual interest. So I am going to be adding some effects to my first ellipse, this big orange ellipse. What I want to actually do before I lose my color of these effects is I actually want to go and sample that same orange. And I'm going to just go and make sure that I have the hex code copied. Because I was playing around with some gradient overlays before, I want to give it a more three-dimensional effect. But obviously none of these presets work for me. So I'm going to be utilizing that same orange and then maybe a slightly more burnt orange that I can sample from this flan to give it a little bit of flavor. You can always select different styles of gradients, a linear gradient, radial gradient, and so forth, depending on the effect that you want to produce. Something like that is going to split your design up very ugly, so I wouldn't select an angle gradient. I would probably select a radial or radial gradient, or linear gradient, that is. And you can always go and increase the scale of it, make it a little bit more noticeable or less noticeable, depending on, again, what you're going for. I want it to be extremely subtle. I also want the dark gradient to be at the bottom, so I'm going to set it to -90 degrees. I also want to add a drop shadow. With drop shadows, remember, you want to be subtle. So in other words, something like this would look really, really fake. So you want to go and use only a little bit of the distance, increase the size to make it really nice and blurry. With drop shadows, it's like adding salt to your food. You don't want it to go too extreme. I might also want to go and add a white stroke around my ellipse, set it to about 35 pixels, give or take. Right now I'm just eyeballing. You guys can certainly be a little bit more specific with it. And I'm going to click OK to save my changes for now. I'm going to be moving on to the text. So I'm going to click on Trojan Treats Cafe. Previously I was playing around with some drop shadows to make the text a little bit more three-dimensional. I'm just going to go and decrease the distance because I want my drop shadows to be very, very subtle. And I'm also going to be going and copying that exact same drop shadow. I can right click, select copy layer style, and I can go and paste it into this layer to just make my editing a little bit faster. I like it so far, but I kind of feel like it's missing something. So I decided that I was going to be adding some shapes here and here, roughly. To do so, I'm going to be using my shape tool again. If you guys right click, there's one called polygon, and I actually want to make some stars. To make stars, you basically select the polygon shape, double click in your document, and then you can input the number of sides that you want. Select the star ratio of 50 sides. I put in 5 sides to create basically a pentagon with a star ratio of 50%. Click OK, and it makes a star for you. And then I'm going to change the fill. I can go and sample one of the colors used in the flan. So for example, this really pale yellow color. Maybe give it a little bit of a stroke. Again, just so it goes and mirrors several of the different attributes in the design. And I'm just going to go hold down Shift and resize it. And in order for me to create a duplicate, I'm going to hit Command J, and I'm going to drag another one on the other side. Alright designers, I think I'm pretty much done with this design. It definitely takes inspiration from Starbucks, but it's its own unique, interesting, and fictional entity. So I'm ready to export my final draft. I want to make sure that I preserve the transparency in the background, so I'm going to be exporting in PNG format by going to File, Export, Export As, and I'm going to make sure that I select PNG as my format. If I selected a different format, such as JPEG, it would add an ugly white background behind it, which is what I want to avoid. So I'm going to leave the format as PNG, and I'm going to click Export and save it to my desktop for now. And this is what my final design looks like. I sincerely hope you found it interesting and that you were able to create your very own fun design for this fictional client. You can hit me up in the comments if you have any questions. Until then, I shall see you in class. Can't wait to see your own designs. Peace out.